One of the things that it is that I always love covering, giving my perspective, my commentary, and my thoughts on, is when you see British journalist Lewis Goodall hold people from Israel, from the IDF, or from the Israeli regime, when he holds them accountable for the actions that it is that are taking place throughout the world. In this clip, we're going to see Lewis Goodall have a heated exchange with a former IDF major general, whatever you want to call him, about the current war that's taking place in Iran. As usual, let's watch the clip in full. I'm going to hold my commentary, my perspective, and my thoughts towards the end, and then I'll chime in from there. Let's get into it.
Former IDF, Israeli Defense Forces spokesperson, I think joining us from Israel now. Major Spielman, thanks so much for joining us this morning. What is the latest, is your understanding? There's a lot of confusion about the status of potential peace talks, with the Iranians often saying they're not happening, Trump saying they're going extremely well. What is your understanding of what is or is not happening?
Well, look, I'm not in the room with the president as he's negotiating. Unfortunately, probably would be very interesting. They're not peace talks. What they have talked about is coming to an agreement, and I think there's a very big difference. Pieces where you have a partner you feel like you can live with. I don't think that that's then the definition of what he's doing. But President Trump, from what I've read and what I understand, he's offering them the same terms he offered them a month ago, to a different regime, meaning the same people he spoke to a month ago are no longer there. They've been eliminated. Their deputies have been eliminated. We're not even exactly sure who he's speaking to, but he's got the same exact proposal, which I actually think is very, very clear. Dismantle your nuclear program, hand over your enriched uranium, and now open the Straits of Hormuz, which I think has been brought up on the world scene, which I think is very, very important. And I think that's what he's offering. Does he think they're going to actually go through with this? I would be doubtful. And I would agree with your last speaker that without those things, this would continue to move on and on and on, because the big threat is nuclear threat, both for the US, for Israel, for Europe, as the Iranians have shown they can hit Europe. And so that's where we are.
But we can't seriously say, can we, that there has actually been regime change in Iran?
There's no, to this point, I think that we're looking at, there's been major regime change. The regime has not fallen, meaning the regime doesn't have the same people in the regime. Their entire, maybe 3 layers have been eliminated. And what we understand, based on intelligence that I've been reading, both Israeli, US, and Jordanian intelligence, shows that their command structure in the field is in complete disarray. That there are people that are, that are getting some type of signal to fire a weapon, fire a missile, fire a UAV, of which they have a large stockpile, but that, while they're hanging on, they're trying to hang on with a facade of hanging on.
Well, I know.
We're trying to look beneath the surface.
Obviously, President Trump.
Beneath the surface, I think that hopefully they're cracking at the seams.
Well, obviously, President Trump has got to try and present the idea that he's winning, and clearly there's been enormous military degradation of Iran, but clearly not enough, because they're still causing chaos in the region and still putting up quite the fight to both the Israelis and the Americans. And Netanyahu and Trump may say that they've achieved some sort of regime change, but that doesn't make sense, does it? Because Iran clearly still has a functioning state apparatus. And if there had been regime change in any serious way, or certainly the sort of regime change that Trump or Netanyahu would want to see, they wouldn't still be doing exactly what the Ayatollah was doing, which is firing missiles in each and every direction, rejecting US peace terms, and exercising clear control over Iran's territory and institutions. There's been no regime change. It's the same regime.
I would agree with you that, and I haven't actually heard, certainly not Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I've been following U.S. news very carefully. I don't believe either of them has said there's been regime change. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there was an announcement over the last few hours. Please.
Trump has claimed there's been regime change.
I haven't heard those words exactly, but perhaps certainly in Israel, I'll tell you, Lewis, that in Israel it's clear to us what a regime change would mean. And I think it's also clear to the U.S. president. What you have up there right now is the son of a diabolical maniac who's invested all of his country's resources in creating a nuclear bomb, ballistic missiles, which are landing next to my home. And you still have the disciples of that same man, Ali Khamenei, in power. So the regime has not been changed. I think we're nowhere near being able to make that announcement. I think we would celebrate making it. What we are seeing is the degradation of the regime, the elimination of the regime's navy. They no longer have ballistic missile production sites. They still have ballistic missiles. We've taken out 2/3 of their launching capabilities. And we hope that they're in disarray. But we have to understand something. There are no fast food wars. Not when you have a regime that's had 40 years to dig in, that have had $400 billion a year of Chinese funding.
Trump said it was nearly over 3 weeks ago.
Again, President Trump is a master negotiator. What I've seen is absolute disruption. I've seen him saying it's nearly over, we're close to a deal, and at the same time, in the same breath, give an order to 10,000 additional Marines to come in the Middle East. So I think that President Trump
makes him look absurd. Doesn't make him look absurd. Doesn't make him look like a master negotiator. It just looks absurd. Looks ridiculous.
I'm not so sure. I think that we're used to kind of diplomatic negotiations where everything's very clear. Trump has people destabilized. He did the same thing before June. He did the same thing before this most recent a campaign. And, when you're dealing with a terror entity, it could be that Trump is kind of creating the fog of war, saying we're close to a deal and giving them a chance, but moving Marines is the language of the Middle East. It may not be the language of England, but I think it is the language of Iran. It seems to me.
Major Spielman, or he could just be making it up as he goes along.
Again, history will tell everything. We'll look back one day and we'll either see President, I think what we're going to see. I'll tell you what I think we're going to see. We look back today and we look at Churchill. You're speaking to me from England, and Churchill was obviously an amazing leader. He stood alone against the odds. He had no guarantees. At the time, his own cabinet, Neville Chamberlain and Lord Halifax thought he was crazy. They were begging him to make a deal with the Nazis, and he refused to do so. And I think the same thing is today. Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump are leading a campaign against what most right-minded people would believe is an evil empire that wants to create destructive nuclear purposes, and there is no guarantee. But that's, I guess, what courage really is.
I'm sure many of my listeners and viewers would agree that Iran is an evil empire, and Major Spielman, and I'm sure they would all agree that we would shed no tears if that regime fell. But isn't the truth that the action of your government and the American government could well now be potentially to empower that regime? Because you may have degraded their military capabilities for a while, but the truth is that they are outplaying you in the sense that they are showing the world that when push comes to shove, they have a chokehold over the world economy. This war is making them look more powerful, not less powerful.
It's fascinating, Lewis, that you say that. And I think it's critically important that Iran's leverage over the world is blackmail. And they've been very careful about using it, but now they use it. We have a terror country that's producing nuclear weapons, obviously doing horrible things to their people. How does it affect the average person in Israel, America, England? They can actually affect and control our gas, and they have no qualms whatsoever about blackmailing the world. And what they're counting on is that people are going to reach into their pocketbooks and say, wait a second, we got to pay these guys off. But it's the same thing. Like if you pay off protection money, to keep your family safe, they just come back with bigger and bigger requests. And if we let the regime survive, which is what they want, I agree with you. Imagine when they're nuclear. And they threatened to close the Straits of Hormuz. We're not looking at $120 a barrel.
Your Prime Minister
We're looking at something much more severe.
Major, your Prime Minister told us that you had obliterated their nuclear program 9 months ago, and now apparently actually it's back in action. So why on earth should we believe what your government says?
Well, I'll tell you, Lewis, I've got what I can tell you for sure is that we have ballistic missiles falling on us. And I can tell you, had we not taken such a blow against them in June, I really fear that instead of ballistic missiles, which create any massive explosion and could take out 100 square blocks in London, or Paris, which is the blast radius of a 1.5-ton ballistic missile, which they have, we would be looking at nuclear weapons now. Had we not struck in June, you and I would be having a vastly different conversation with a nuclear Iran. So I think that June carried out an incredible step. I'm still alive to talk about it, but to unearth.
As you know, there are lots and lots of experts. As you know, there are lots and lots of experts who say that the claims that the Iranians were that close to a nuclear missile is absolute nonsense. And frankly, if you're saying that we should believe Netanyahu told us that he'd obliterated that program 9 months ago, which would have meant that this war was never necessary in the first place. But now here we are with the whole world economy in turmoil on the basis of what Benjamin Netanyahu says.
Again, when you give a country, as I was saying before, all this time to dig in, create a nuclear program, we have to understand Iran is a vastly massive country. You can hide 400 kilograms of uranium inside your back cupboard, inside a house. Then it doesn't take much for them to come back out again and start the program. What it did do was it prevented their centrifuges from spinning, from increasing that uranium supply, but to enrich it and put it on a warhead. We can see that they have the warheads. And so again, had we not acted in June, Lewis, and I think I even had a conversation with you, many people were saying, why are you acting in June? Can you really do it? Had we not acted, again, we would be looking at nuclear Iran. And if we don't act now, Lewis, and I understand there's no guarantee, then you're probably looking in a year or two at a nuclear Iran, and that will affect not only world shipping, it will affect the entire world.
Let's briefly talk about what's going on in Lebanon. Your government says that it's targeting Hezbollah, not civilians. So why are our entire residential areas in southern Lebanon being rendered uninhabitable? At what point does collateral damage become something else?
Hezbollah, as we all know, was supposed to disarm both in 2006, according to the United Nations, 1701. The Lebanese government was ordered to disarm them. They had signed an agreement not to go south of the Litani, and they exactly went south of the Litani River, where they're within a stone's throw of Israeli communities. And they've thrown those stones. We're very lucky that they did not invade on October 8th and carry out a massively more painful attack like October 7th in Israel's northern border. And we have to understand something even more, Lewis, that we know Hezbollah and Iran are really one and the same. It's really having Iran on your northern border. Israel's most basic.
But those civilians aren't part of the Iranian government.
I'll get there. I'm explaining our motivation. That the Iranian regime has created Hezbollah on Israel's northern border, and not only have they terrorized Israel, the people to lose on this are the regular Lebanese citizens, and you can listen to them speak. They say, we have no beef with Israel. As a matter of fact, between 1948 and 1960...
And why are you bombing them out of their homes?
There were, just one moment, between 1940 and 1968, before Hezbollah, Israel and Lebanon had not a friendly, but an understanding relationship in which a total of 16 people were killed in 20 years. Once Hezbollah entered the picture, Lebanese civilians, more than 6,000 were killed. I mean, their lives have been taken over. The problem is, as you and I both know, Hezbollah doesn't wear uniforms and operate separate from the civilians. They use their homes. I've been inside the homes. Every home in southern Lebanon, the Shiite homes, are controlled command centers. They hold weapons supplies. They have tunnels going underneath them, which I've been in. You can see it all online. And so therefore, if you want to destroy Hezbollah, unfortunately, you have to destroy their infrastructure and push them north of Litani.
But as you know, under international humanitarian law, attacks must be proportionate. How are you calculating proportionality when strikes are hitting densely populated areas and displacing tens of thousands of civilians?
Well, you know what the alternative would be, Lewis? The alternative would be for most armies in the world to strike Hezbollah with those civilians there, and God forbid, having tens of thousands of civilians.
You're saying there's no alternative to how Israel is conducting itself in southern Lebanon right now.
It would be
that
brilliant.
or bust.
Well, I'll tell you something, Lewis. We don't forget, under President Biden, Israel pulled out of Lebanon in November of 2024. And what were we promised? We were promised at the time that the Lebanese army was going to disarm Lebanon, and that France, the UK, and UNIFIL were going to make sure that there was no Hezbollah. What did we see? Just a few weeks ago, Israel didn't attack Hezbollah. Hezbollah launched 6 ballistic rockets into Israel, which means all they're doing is getting bigger and bigger. And I think we've learned our lesson. We cannot allow a terror regime to continue uninterrupted on our border where it could kill our citizens. Our first responsibility is to Israelis. And yes, we've asked these Lebanese civilians to leave the area because we want to kill Hezbollah. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but for 20...
Man, it's been a while since I've gave my perspective and thought and commentary on a clip when it comes to the Israeli regime in particular. And do you know what this is giving me right now? This is giving me the same type of conversations that we were having in the mix, in the depth of everything that was taking place between Israel and Gaza, which I must say still hasn't stopped. Still has not stopped. Israel is still killing people in Gaza right now. Just wanted to highlight that point. I think overall what it is that I'd say when it comes to this clip, and the reason as to why I only have to put it like this is because anybody who's watched this clip themselves, everybody kind of comes to their own conclusion. I think this is why Israel is losing the war from the standpoint of people's perspective and people's outview on them all across the world. This is really what I feel. Even when you take a look at what's taking place within MAGA right now, the thing that is tearing MAGA apart from the inside out is Israel. Because the way in which that they do things, the way in which that they're conducting themselves, Benjamin Netanyahu and a lot of his regime, they're not conducting things in a conducive way. Everyone understands the way that war works. But like Lewis Goodall said towards the end of that clip, the problem is that what they're doing is they're leveling areas that are heavily packed with citizens. And what will happen is you will have Israeli talking pieces like this major that will come on interviews and they'll give their perspective and they'll try and justify the fact that Israel are targeting civilians. And it's always a thing of, yeah, we let people know ahead of time, but unfortunately, the only way that you can get rid of Hamas, the only way that you can get rid of Hezbollah is by targeting, because they're utilizing the civilians, they're utilizing the civilian infrastructure. That's always the talking point. It's always the talking line. But if you do your own research and you take a look, one of the things that you will see that is being heavily reported is that Israel are trying to take over, I believe it was southern Lebanon. That's what it is that they're trying to do. So why is it that you always see commentary and a perspective from Israeli talking pieces like this major that you can see on the screen, but you'll never ever see them give their full-blown truth on what's happening and exactly what's taking place? And you see that different arms of the regime are saying different things. And then it's always a thing of, well, you know, you can't control what this person says. You know, they're going to say this, they're going to say that. The reality is the situation that's taking place in the world right now. Yes, everybody knows the Iranian regime have bad actors, have evil individuals within them. Yes, everybody knows that. But the question that is at hand is this. Is what's happening and what's taking place right now in the world, Was it warranted? Was it justified based off everything that it is that's happening now? The shockwaves that are happening all around the world because of what's taking place. Was it warranted? The answer to the question is no, because there was no imminent threat. Israel would say there was an imminent threat. You see, the unfortunate reality is this: there's so much evidence that we can take a look at to see that Benjamin Netanyahu wasn't telling the truth on the things that he was saying. Why? Because Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying for nearly 40 years that Iran are a couple of weeks away from nuclear capability. Nearly 40 years he's been saying that. Look it up. There's clips you can see on the internet where he's going back and saying that for years upon years upon years. And in him saying those things and going back and continuously saying that, you can see that it was never the truth that he was telling when he said that. Even up to this morning, I was watching a video. Jon Stewart hosted someone on his TV show. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he even said the deal that it is that Barack Obama struck with the Iranian people, it was a deal that they were following to the T. They were following it to the T, actually having people coming in and inspecting all of their facilities to make sure that they weren't building no nuclear facilities. But the individual who came in because of pride and ego and because he didn't like Donald Trump, because he didn't like Barack Obama, was Donald Trump, ripped that deal up. And as a result of that, here's where it is that we're at today. And even then, there was reporting that Iran were completely fine with striking a deal so that they wouldn't build nuclear. But guess what now? Do you think you can now have that conversation with Iran moving forward? Of course not. They right now have two nuclear countries that are literally destroying their country, as we can see right now. Do you think they're going to be willing to come to the table again? Of course not. Now, that doesn't mean because people like myself and Lewis Goodall saying what we're saying that we believe that the Iranian regime is good. No. But you have to understand, sometimes you need to be able to strike a deal from a position of strength. And the reality is this: the Iranians now, they have absolutely no reason whatsoever to come to the negotiating table. They have no reason to do so. None. So they're going to continue to hold the Straits of Hormuz. They're going to continue to strike US and Israeli allies in the region. They're going to continue to wreak havoc all around the world because guess what? The Strait of Hormuz being closed, prices here in the UK have risen. Price in the United States has risen. We're all being affected by it. But this is why when you have talking pieces like this from Israel trying to justify their actions and the wars and things that they're doing all around the world, people like me, people like you, we just don't buy it. Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comment section below. And hit the subscribe button, hit the hype button as well. And give the video a thumbs up purely for the YouTube algorithm. Really interested, intrigued to hear your guys' thoughts, commentary, and perspective down in the comment section below. Appreciate you guys, and I will see you guys in the next one.